This summer was a summer of grief, an unexpected tsunami of grief. You'd think as someone who's spent majority of the last 2 years processing the death of my mom, that grieving the death of yet another parent would feel recognizable and familiar. And yet, grieving the death of my dad has felt incredibly strange. My name is Kirsten, and I spend my days processing grief and healing while staying kind, cozy, and courageous. And today I want to talk about how I make sense of grief when grief isn't making a lot of sense. Ever since the day I found out my dad died, I've found it difficult to identify my feelings. It's like I'm not even consciously experiencing emotions. All I've felt is physically heavy, as though my body is being weighted down. And I wanted to make sense of it, but I didn't know how. And then I remembered how my mom loved to start her days by walking out into the balcony and tending to her plants. That little ritual brought her such peace and joy first thing in the morning. One thing about me, I love me some peace and joy. Since it was summer, I decided to take a page out of my mom's book and start my own garden. I reminded myself that grief sits in the body, not just the heart. And so maybe working with my hands was the key to understanding the feelings of my grief. I do not have a green thumb whatsoever, so this is very much a beginner's guide to starting a garden. And I decided to focus on herbs since I've been told they're relatively easy to take care of. And I also loved the idea of potentially using them in my cooking throughout the summer. To save money instead of buying pots to plant my herbs, I decided to grow my herbs in leftover glass jars I had lying around the house. I filled the bottom with sand that I had collected from the park nearby. And then added a layer of rocks. Luckily, I had saved these rocks that I had used as decor for an event. I initially didn't add enough rocks, which meant that the herbs didn't have enough drainage and moss started to grow. So I'd recommend adding double the amount of rocks. Once the jars were filled with sand and rocks, it was time to add soil and herbs. For this part, you're going to need a basin, a plant cutter, and some gardening gloves if you're a posh princess like me and you don't want soil all up in your nails. I bought potted herbs instead of seeds because it was already summer and I wanted to be able to use the herbs immediately. I divided each potted herb into 3 or 4 and then added these to the jars with some extra soil. The necks of the jars were quite narrow, so I had to maneuver the plants a little to get them in there. But I found that the narrow space actually encouraged the herbs to grow vertically, which I loved. Outside of being cheaper, I loved the look of the herbs in the mason jars. Considering I know very little about gardening, it was so interesting to witness myself invest time and energy into learning how to care for my herbs. It got me thinking about how much time and energy I was willing to spend learning to care for myself as I grieve, even when this grief is completely uncharted territory. It's wild how caring for others can guide us to care for ourselves. I ran out of jars after potting the rosemary, cilantro, and parsley, so I decided to leave the basil and thyme in their original pots for the night and pick up some extra pots tomorrow. I'm not gonna lie, this really frustrated me. I had my heart set on repotting all my herbs in one day, and I didn't want to have to wait a whole other day. I was so scared that if I waited, the herbs in the original pots would die because they were overcrowded. And it was hard to let go of that fear and make space for the possibility that everything would actually turn out okay. Even if the plants ended up dying, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Letting go of control is something I really struggle with when it comes to grief. As someone who is so used to having her shit together and finding the resources that I need to figure my shit out, grief really fucks me up. It's a daily lesson that sometimes life throws me a curveball and I need to pause. I can't continue on as though nothing happened. And sometimes, even if I want to figure out a way to keep going, I might not have the resources I need to continue. And sometimes I might have to wait until I get access to those resources. And I need to trust that I will eventually get access to those resources. And even if I don't, I need to accept that that's okay too. I'm allowed to fall apart and not be able to get back up. Because I'm human, and some things hit us so hard that we never recover. I picked up some larger pots and also some smaller pots to place in planters and repotted the basil and thyme the next day. And what do you know, all my herbs were still alive, and wow, did my window sill look breathtaking. After a couple days, I noticed that some of my cilantro was dying and I wondered if it needed less sun. So I trimmed off the dead stems and leaves and moved the cilantro jars from the windowsill to a ledge in between the kitchen and living room. Tending to my plants every day had me regularly checking in with them and noticing how their environment might be impacting their growth and the specific ways they needed to be nourished, keeping in mind that their needs might change from day to day. I started to wonder if I have as much patience, compassion, and understanding when it comes to my own needs in my grief journey. Do I pay close attention to my environment and the ways it might be impacting my growth? Am I aware of the specific ways I need to be nourished every day? Do I make space for those needs to change as I evolve? Trimming my herbs is sometimes to get rid of dead stems and leaves, and sometimes it's to encourage the herbs to grow in a specific way, and sometimes it's so that I can use the herbs in my food. And all those reasons are part of the circle of life, and all those reasons are meaningful. And I wish we spoke about grief that way too. I often hear people talk about the importance of taking the pain of grief and transforming it into purpose. And if that's what people need in their grief journey, that's really meaningful. But so is just experiencing pain. The pain of grief is a reminder of how much something or someone meant to us, and that in itself matters. Pain is a part of experiencing death, and experiencing death is a part of living through the circle of life. Our pain doesn't need to be transformed into purpose for it to be meaningful. Just experiencing life is meaningful enough. Once my herbs survived past a couple weeks, I decided to move deeper into my gardening journey and learn more about the ways I could nourish my plants beyond just water and sunlight. I learned to make a compost tea with bananas and coffee grounds and eggshells because these ingredients carry a variety of nutrients that help fertilize plants. My herbs loved their compost tea. I noticed them brighten up whenever I fed them tea. This was such an important reminder for me as I moved deeper into my own grief journey. Once I figured out how to sleep and eat, How could I learn more about replenishing my body, mind, heart, and soul? How could I rest and rejuvenate? How could I pour into myself, knowing how much of myself is being given just so I can survive my grief? These are some insights I've been gifted and some lessons I've learned as I got in my way through grief. If you're experiencing a kind of grief that makes no sense to you, I hope some of these lessons resonated with you. TLDR, grief can be confusing as heck, no matter how many times you've encountered it. And I'm committed to loving myself through all my types of grief. If you would like to follow along with my journey of grief and healing, here are some other videos you might be interested in. That's all for now. Bye!